this is me. I won't read through my outlines because you're always supposed to do that for talks. And if you do teaching training, they always tell you to do that. I'm rubbish with those outlines because I end up trying to do the talk to the outline. So there's an outline at the left there, but I won't tell you about it. But first of all, I'll just tell you a few things about me, which I said will just reiterate some of the things you've already heard. So I work partly at the University of Birmingham, partly at Tallis, which are both based in Birmingham, which happens to be the Barry Centre of England. And I used to work in Lancaster, which was the Barry Centre of the whole of the British Isles. But but I don't actually live there. I live out in Tiree, which is the Barry Centre of not much. I think if you balance Britain on Tiree, it will fall over into the sea, which is a little island off the west coast of Scotland, which is very nice. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But I'm Welsh. I was born and brought up in Cardiff, in Bangor Street. Who knows Bangor Street in Roath Park, yeah? So, you know, the wreck down the end, used to know from little. But also, I mean, which is not unconnected to the topic of the lecture today. But also being here is very special because I was at Hawardian High School, which is now not a school anymore and has been largely built over. And as an old Hawardian friend here today. But in the sixth form, I used to come to what was then the FE college on this site to do a computing A-level, and I came once a week. And now I'm a professor of computing. So, and it's not just that. There used to be a library in the college, and there were maths books in the library, and I am sure they were nothing to do with any of the courses. Clearly, one of the lecturers there was sort of ordering books that were ones he wanted to read. And I used to be able to borrow these. Later on, I went to Cambridge and did maths there. Maths is still my first love. But, you know, I was doing things, learned such a lot from that library. So really, this is very much an academic home for me. So it's very nice both to be here and also to have the visiting professorship here. It's absolutely fantastic. So there's a lot of things I'm not going to tell you about, so I'll put a list. So if anyone, you can look very quickly and ignore it all. I would love to tell you about some of the things, but no time. I'm also not going to tell you about, but I will just say a word or two about. Over about, I think it was 2003, we started putting little computers behind lights. And I won't tell you a lot about that, but we have these little intelligent lights. This year, they are about to go into full commercial production. So by the end of this year, sort of town centres across Europe will have our little lights in. Each light has a computer behind them. 1 pixel computers. That Christmas tree there has 1,000 computers on it, which is quite cool. Anyway, yeah. So if you find any bit of the Europe is now totally kitsch, it is all due to some colleagues and I at Lancaster. But they're jolly pretty, they're so lovely. But there's really interesting, those are interesting commercialization stories, research stories, all wrapped into that. I'm also not going to tell you, I've been doing, those of academics here, I'm going to say the word MOOC. Right, I've been doing a MOOC. Oh, no. So anyway, but I'm not going to tell you about that. But if any of you are interested in online stuff and some of the time it takes to do and stuff, I will tell you all about that. But what I'm going to talk about is the walking around Wales. Will this work now? Yeah, it does. Because that's great, because I'll just stand a little bit out the way, haven't I? Yeah, so I'm going to talk about walking around Wales. So I think a lot of you know, most of you know, the Welsh Coast Path was opened last May. Lots of existing bits of path glued together. So it's not that you couldn't do it before, but it was open to single path. And with Offa's Dyke going up the borderlands, you can actually now go all the way around Wales. Actually, if you follow the exact border of Wales, I reckon there's probably at least another 100 miles there. But Offa's Dyke cuts a slightly shorter journey across and ends up at Prestatyn on the North Coast. So effectively, you can go around. Last year, I keep changing this figure because I keep finding more. There are 3 full traversals. Ari, are you here? Oh, wow! Oh, Ari ran around Wales last year. I just absolutely in awe of you, Ari. Absolutely fantastic to see you. Oh dear, I've got tears in my eyes. No, absolutely. I mean, really fantastic. Anyway, so Anne was the first person to do that complete traversal. I don't remember. So, as I said, I'm not going to be the first person going around. However, there's a sort of a bit of a special, different tack to why I'm doing this. So there's a number of reasons I'm doing this. Some of them very personal reasons. So as I told you, I come from Wales. It's a homecoming thing. There's a lot of stuff. You know this is false, but there's something about drawing around something, isn't it, which sort of says I've got it. That's why you put your boundary stones in. So there's a certain amount of when you draw, but of course you don't. And I think that tension between the going around that sort of reclaims, and yet the fact it doesn't, is a very interesting one. And this, also some senses of homecoming, but also pilgrimage. And as you go round the coasts and the borders of Wales, you hit pretty much all the old holy sites of Wales as well, all the monasteries and things like that. So it's interesting, these things wrapped together. There's a long history about walking and movement and pilgrimage and stuff. So these things tie together. And that fits actually very much into the third category as well. But first of all, there's also a practical thing. I'm very interested as I go around in the IT issues, both for the walker, so the person walking around, but also for the local communities. Some of that, and there's actually BBQ or barbecue, different people. I know this, and also Matt. I'm trying to think it's Matt Chilcott here as well. I can't remember who was coming. But I've got various people in the meeting, and hopefully there'll be a lot of chance encounters as well. This is very much 19th century science. It's about meeting, there's lots that's going to happen by chance as well as things that are pre-organized. But anyway, I'm very interested in particularly the technological, the issues in general and how technology makes life better or worse. We'll come back to that. Linking into the personal ones, and also into the philosophical issues about walking. And again, there's a big literature on this, and a lot of people know this better than I do. I will be meeting up with some of the people in both Bangor and Aberystwyth, and particularly Aberystwyth, they walking, and actually the philosophic and the media and the literary issues of walking quite cool there and important there. Also, though, issues about space and locality and identity, which link into some of the work that I've done over the years in understanding the relationship between what goes on in your head when you think about space, but also when you think in generally. And a lot of our ordinary day-to-day thinking about other topics, whether it's mathematics or literature or things, are actually tied to understanding of space and things. So there's lots of issues about that, and sort of issues about the sense of locality that goes with that. And then there's a sort of a research agenda which ties, I suppose the philosophical bit is a research agenda as well, but also ties very much into the practical one. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So, okay, there's a number of inspirations for it, why I'm interested in doing this. I've already mentioned the Welsh connections, it's less like this. But I live on this little island there off the west coast of Scotland, to zoom in a bit. And that is a very, 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 very busy day on Tyree. It was a particular actually event I was involved in. If you see somebody else on the beach, you think, cool, it's getting like Blackpool here. It's a big windsurfing island and kite surfing island, because it's very flat and windy, which makes a nice, there's a sort of youthful edge to it. But also, that's a corncrake. If you go to Skye, you'll see signs everywhere that says, if you hear a corncrake, report it, because they're so rare and people want to know where they are. On Tyree, corncrakes keep people awake at night. Now, that's intimately related to the fact that the farming practice on the island is very traditional. Now, it doesn't mean that they're out there cutting with scythes, but it is the most well-preserved crofting community, I think, that's in Scotland. And these two are not unrelated, that the farming practices and the nature go together. Human actions and environment intimately linked. And that's something I think we see everywhere. So it's quite a small island, a lot of visitors, but a smallish island, with virtually no mobile coverage. I think this is going to be an issue walking around Wales as well, right? So this is, I'm interested in the issues of community. But also on the island, I've been very involved in a number of things which are about the nature of technology in the island. And there's other stuff that was existing. It's, well before I was there, it was I think the first of the wireless-based internet connections on the island. So about half the people on the island have their internet connection through wireless means. It's done as an independent community company. And it was the first of these, I think, in the Western Isles. I've been involved in organising a biannual, I'm not sure what to call it. Some people call it technology retreat. It's a sort of maker event. We get people basically come and do stuff together. And so twice a year, technologists, artists, designers, including quite some contingent from Cardiff, come up and do stuff together. And that's both for people coming, because there is something about the open landscape that changes the way you think about what you're doing. You know, we're not divorced. When you sit in your little office, it is not the same as sitting and doing. It changes your thought pattern. Doesn't mean you always do one or the other, but it's about differences in thought. But also for the community, the idea of bringing those people in and saying that actually, if the peripheries are to survive in any way apart from being retirement communities, technology is intimately part of that. You know, it can't dominate it, but it's part of it. Also some practical projects. We've been involved in putting a mobile app for the local Heritage Centre, which for an island of 700 people, the Heritage Centre has 12,000 catalogued items, and they are catalogued, which is quite an incredible thing. And we basically trying to make that available to people walking around the island on a mobile app whilst there is no mobile signal. I mean, also, out of the tech wave, this is the last one, not the last one, the one before that. The youth worker came talking once to tell us about her issues, and somebody said, at the end, it was towards, said, what is the most important, what's the most difficult issue you find as a youth worker? And she said, telling people about events and getting them to come. The getting to come is difficult because on an island, even a small island is big, and youth at night means you're getting lifts. There's no buses or anything like that, not at night. That's a more difficult one, but the telling people. And one of the issues was she communicates using Facebook, but in school they can't use Facebook, but they do have their phones. And somebody in the island says, I know this system that was designed for using actually in developing countries. That was an SMS-based broadcast type system. Now, for various reasons, and basically, when she heard about it, she said, yay, that's brilliant. For various reasons, as a system itself, it didn't work, but we basically created her a very dedicated system that she now uses in order to communicate. So very sort of practical things that are connected to it. Another inspiration is Nick, the amazing cycling program. This was, I think, a year ago or so, or more, no, 2 to 3, I was losing my track. But this guy, this was in March, comes knocking on the door and says, I've heard there's something on, a tech wave, can I come? And I said, of course. He happened to be on the island. He just happened to be there. And saw a poster or a leaflet or something about it. He had been on the road since June the previous year on a bicycle with a trailer and programming as he went around. That was his life since then. For the first 6 months, he had a tarp and didn't have a tent. I think it was only in November or so he actually got a tent. But he was programming. He was actually doing it on the move. He had sort of wind-up solar panels, various stuff. He thought Oban was busy. He'd lived in London before, but he's doing this. I wish I had some photographs of him, actually. Another thing, there's many of these things, but as a child, maps were always good. But I also had one of those little globes. Little metal globes, there's a picture with them, that's right. And I used to just love it and just would spend hours gazing at these countries. And I always used to imagine walking around the world. So, and in fact, I remember some years later, I'm really excited when I saw Fiona, I can't remember the name of the Fiona something or other, who did the walk. Yeah, some of you know that book, yeah. Well, there's a series of books she wrote, she walked across the different continents. I was slightly optimistic about certain things, like I thought you could get across the Aleutians by swimming the gaps. But anyway, I'm not going around the world, but I'm going to go around Wales, which is pretty much the world, isn't it? So we're not doing badly there. Okay, now originally actually I had put themes and research separately, and I've put them together because they just intertwine, so I won't try and separate them. What I want to do is just talk a little now, and this is quite a longish section, so it's actually... Actually, I have no idea how long I take for things, but I don't feel like I've taken very long. I haven't. So, but I'm not actually nearly finished, I know. Because what I want to do is tell you a bit about some of the issues that I'm going to be interested in. And there are many ones. And again, and that's interesting. For those of you involved in research, this is not standard 21st century research. This is 19th century style exploratory research. And you don't always be doing that. And I think I've bought myself the freedom to do that by having done perhaps more sort of tight stuff for a lot of years. But it's not the way, it is not about having very fixed questions to answer. There are some things I'm interested in, but it is very much about understanding what the questions are. Now, both are important, but I find in life, if I know a question, I'm pretty good at finding answers to things. Sometimes there's harder ones than easier, but when you know the questions, it's often, you've got a way of finding the answer. Finding the questions is the thing that is often the hardest bit. It's not the only thing you want to be doing, but is often the hard bit. And this is very much about question finding, perhaps more than answer finding. Hopefully there'll be some answers on the way as well. But it's very much about question finding. And it's a different ways of doing research. And that's true in the lab, actually, as well as on the move. And it's often we confuse the two. So actually, as a research thing, actually thinking about what you're really after when you're doing this stuff is very important. So I'll talk about some of the themes. And actually, there are lots of them. And I'll have a slide a little bit later about some of the themes where I'm connecting it with other people. And it gets an even longer list at that point. So first of all, one of the things I've talked about a bit already is about the margins. Now I'm going to be walking around the outside of Wales. I'm going physically around the margins of Wales. And now, in one way, actually, and this is a term that Alan, where's Alan gone? Oh, Alan, right in the back, hiding at the back there. But Alan used the word a transect. We were talking actually about lines through Britain, but realizing from talking about that, actually, that this is a socio-economic transect of a modern nation. Right? Because you actually go through all the rural areas, which I've got a particular focus on here, but also through all the cities. All the major concepts. And Wrexham I would have missed a bit because of the coast path, but actually I'm going to give a talk in Glyndŵr University, so I'll actually get into Wrexham as well, which used to be the biggest city in Wales, of course, a few hundred years ago, quite a lot of 100 years ago. So actually, sort of going around, but I'm particularly interested in the margins, the margin issues. But they're physical margins, but often the physical margins, the distant points, are often marginal other ways. They're often the social margins, the economic margins. Certainly on Tyree, I've been told the median wage, I think, is £18,000 a year, whereas I think mind you, this has all changed in recent years, but I think it was sort of something like 24 or so over the rest of the country. And that will be common across rural areas. It's not just Tyree, that's a common thing. So you've got economic margins, often social as well. There's a whole set of issues that happen when you're at the edge. So social marginality. So it's not just about, so that in one sense, the physical margins you can think of as symbolizing, but also that there are other sorts of marginality around. There is marginality of age, and one of the charities, one of the charities I'm collecting for is MHA, which is, used to be Methodist Homes for the Aged. Now it's just, you're supposed to say MHA, but a branding thing, they sort of thing, because it is now not just Methodist, but is a charity that has various homes and different projects for the elderly, a lot of dementia care nowadays. And I'll be visiting two of their sites, one up in Colwyn Bay and one down in Penarth at different points. So the elderly, but the poor as well. And we're obviously in a time when poverty is becoming a bigger, it's always an issue. It never stops being an issue. But it's a particularly important issue now. Again, actually one of the other, so there's 10 of us in the middle, and I'm also collecting, so 10 of us, which is cancer charity, but also the Wallach, which is a Cardiff-based charity for the homeless, that again has projects all around Wales. But what are the issues there? And particularly the information, so again, there's lots of issues, and most of them aren't about technology, but obviously I have knowledge and stuff, and I'm obviously particularly looking for things that I might, or people that I know might be able to do things about. But in our modern age, information is, it's critical to so much of what we do. You know, if you want to get health information, what do? You go to the internet. If you want to fill out, you know, a government form, what do? You go to the internet. If you want to buy things most cheaply, what do? You go to the internet. When we lived in York, this was when Esther, my other daughter just got married just over a week ago, but Esther, my elder daughter, is here. And Esther was actually born in Carlisle, but was early years were all in York. And we used to live about a mile out of the centre and about a mile from the university. And we didn't have a car, we walked everywhere. Sainsbury's was right at the edge of the town, the walled town, right by a major residential area, and it was impossible to walk to Sainsbury's. Or at least you had to perch. We used to go with a pushchair. You had to perch on little bits of stuff that was between roadways to get across. Right? Cars. Right? If you want to get things cheaply, if you want to get things, cars are an essential part of things. And now the internet is the modern car. Right? And when you're cut off from that, you are cut off from society. Right? Now, at the margins in Tarry, and I'm sure I'm going to find this around Wales, you know, our broadband can be touchy. At least we have it. Right? We do actually have some broadband, right? This is major. So information poverty tends to correlate with other kinds of marginality, with age, with economic things, and with distance. So there's a danger that people become doubly disadvantaged. And yet, if anything, technology becomes more important at the margins because you are physically distant. Again, on the islands, I know there's probably more internet shopping than there would be in a typical community of the same size elsewhere, because that's how you get things. So it becomes both more important and yet it's harder. So there's a real social challenge there, a real technological challenge is what can you do about this? Yes, I think I've said all of that. I find this very fascinating. I mentioned earlier about the reconnecting, which was based on or influenced by a system that had been designed for developing countries. Some years ago, I was involved in a project which was... I hope I haven't disrupted that too horribly by doing that. A project with jointly between Indian and UK academics. And one of the things I found fascinating going there was the relationships and the closeness of the issues in rural India and in rural UK. I don't mean they're the same, you know, but there are a lot of things that correlate. Some things that happened here 100 years ago, which you see happening there now, like the destruction of hand weaving industry, for instance. But of course, that's still an issue in the Outer Hebrides today. So sometimes you see things happening at different times. You think, are there lessons that we can learn? But often a lot of similar issues. And it's very interesting to see these things actually being borrowed over, actually seeing things. So the SMS system to talk about was something that was designed for the developing world and suddenly realizing, actually, this is useful here. Some of you might have seen stuff about the hole in the wall. This was in, I can't remember where in India it was first done, but basically they went to a wall and literally put a hole in the wall, stuck a computer in it. And then and it was for children, it was aimed at the children. No instructions, just let them do it. And the incredible learning that happened from doing it, not from being told what to do, just from doing anything they wanted. And it's quite thin. The guy who was involved in that, I don't know if he's still there, but he came to the UK after to Newcastle University, and he didn't do the same thing. You know, if you put a computer in a hole in the wall in Newcastle, one is the elements would get to it, and I think the odd beer can might go through it at some point, so it wouldn't fit. But in Jedburgh, he was doing different, but inspired by that kind of projects with young people and with children in Jedburgh. So it's interesting that these crossover lessons, because there's often more similarity between marginal areas in the developing world and in the UK than between the developed areas and the undeveloped areas in each of them. In fact, one of the things I found fascinating in India was how, I was trying to get the right word, but I discovered that the majority of the people I was involved with there, not all of them, some who knew it much better, but the majority, I had a better idea of rural India than they did, and they were in India, because they were in the cities, and why should they? You know, if you live in the middle of London, you don't know where your milk comes from. And that was quite an eye-opener. You know, there's some people there who really spent a lot of time and knew an awful lot. But of course, that's exactly what you'd expect. It's not unexpected, and yet it was, you know, so it was surprising that I was surprised, but I was surprised. Some years ago, and I think this was when we first lived in the country, actually, for a short period, and I became fascinated. This is early 90s, before the internet. Well, not before the internet, before the web. Right? So yes, there was life before the web. And the closing of village shops is a critical issue. I mean, probably the only reason there are small shops on our island is because if you had to spend a day to go to the shops and back, it would be difficult. And if it was 700 people in a village, pretty much anywhere else on the mainland, there wouldn't be shops there because you'd travel. But then if you were poor and didn't have a car, you're stuffed. And certainly we used to live in this village. It wasn't that far away, but there was a bus once a week. Once a week. If you miss your bus, you've got to wait for next week. And I remember getting fascinated and talking about and never doing anything about the electronic village shop. I thought, could the village shop be transformed by technology? Could you have just-in-time buying for the shop, where you go into the shop in the morning and say, I'd like to cook this. That the shopkeeper, who is your information scientist, looks up the recipes, it goes into the picking line. By the time you get back there in the evening, it's been delivered and is ready. And at that time, I was thinking about dial-up connections and barcode readers. Now it would be different technology. Now we actually have the logistics to do that much more easily. Now, actually, probably that's still a valid dream. It's never happened, never did anything about it. You know, I don't think it's going to happen. There's some things that you just know are just going to happen. Other things probably won't happen unless people do things about them. Now, whether that's a good job, but, you know, what are the equivalent things now? I mean, maybe that's still something to look at, but certainly, you know, what are the equivalent things? But the things that we need to do things about, particularly thinking about myself as an academic, you know, there are things that will happen anyway because of the way industry works, the way commerce works. There are things sometimes you have to do things about to make them happen. So I don't know, what are the relevant things now? I'm also, this is now more going to shift into a more philosophical thing, but actually intimately connected, but in a different way. So I told you I was sort of interested in the nature of our minds and the way they relate to space. So I won't try and talk about all of these, because each one of them I could probably do an hour on. But the intimate connections, I think, between the nature of spatial cognition and concept formation. Now, it's not clear. Some of those are clearly deep cognitive relationships. So you reuse bits of your visual, your spatial mind for things. Most mathematicians tend to use, if you do brain scans, it's the spatial bits of their mind that hit them. About 10% it's the linguistic bit, about 90% it's the spatial bit. And I think most of the linguistic ones, most but not all, are logicians, which say you're much more symbol manipulation. Whereas most mathematicians, you know, that's why you have Venn diagrams everywhere, because you just sort of see these things which are abstract, and yet and actually, I'm sure I've done this with Steve. Like when I talk about a design, I will draw a space and say, there's one design, there's another design, there's a kettle, and there's a toaster. And you instantly start spatially putting. But I think that's not, there's some deep things there. Also issues related to that, different about, you know, stories and journeys. And when, like on Sunday, Steve mentioned Newgale to me, and instantly in my mind, I'm thinking late June, because that's when I'm going to be there. I've already started to mix time and space through those things. I won't go into transarticulation after, but boundaries, especially, I found it. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but a line here does two things. It joins end to end, and it separates side to side. I mean, actually, if you think about sort of life and stuff, those are some pretty important things you can do with the same thing. You can separate and you can join. Make your choices, right? Boundaries separate. There's an inside and there's an outside. But where a joining line, oops, goodness knows, I'll get back to that. But where a joining line crosses a separating line, you get thresholds. And thresholds, those doorways. You know, there is so much in the sort of in mythology about, so back a bit. so much in mythology about thresholds, about doors to different worlds. You know, thresholds, doorways. You know, I don't know if you remember when it's John Sentimo, when he came, it was Archbishop of York, and you know, I mean, it happens with when they're all of them, but I can remember it seeing the thumping on the door they do, being let into the cathedral. Thresholds, really, really deep things, because there's some pretty weird stuff going on. I won't talk about transarticulation, that will take me a long, long time. Okay, maps. I've already mentioned maps a bit. How am I doing time now, actually?
It's nearly 22.
Okay, so that's pretty good. So, maps. I've already mentioned maps. Again, I've mentioned to a few people I've talked to already. Probably there's a self-selection here, I'm sure. And I mentioned there's quite a lot in the abstract, so it's only a little bit of this in the abstract. I used to pore over maps as a child. I loved that sense of being somewhere else by looking at that map. Other people have, you know, map lovers here. Who's a map lover? There's quite a few. There's a magic to them, isn't it? You're transported to this other place in your mind through this thing, this bit of paper. Now, I will be having my bits of technology, and I will have some maps on these, but I will jolly well have my paper maps with me as well. But it's not just about that. It has never been easier to stick a map on your web page. Right? You know, you go to your Google Maps API, you create your layers, you stuff it all together. You need a little bit of technology knowledge, but not a lot. But the maps you have are the standardized global map. They're Google Maps. You know, maybe Ordnance Survey. You know, the maps that were designed for military use, which we now take as the standard map. Think about that. Right? You know, we standardize the world, we make it global. Now, there are good reasons for that. I will be using Ordnance Survey maps a lot. I love Ordnance Survey maps, you know. When you get down to detail, you want it. However, they are a particular story about the landscape. Maps tell you stories. They create knowledge, they create understanding. We were talking about this earlier, about, you know, what would the difference. I haven't seen these, actually. I'm sure there's some major differences between an Israeli map of the Middle East and an Arab map of the Middle East. When I was little, right, and those of you, some of you will remember this, nodding heads already, you already know what I'm going to say, I think. There were English maps of Wales and there were Welsh maps of Wales. And the English maps of Wales had 12 counties, and the Welsh maps of Wales had 13 counties. And Monmouthshire, at that point, was part of England by the English view. Now it's not. Now part went in the local government reorganisation. Right? But maps, you know, they are, you know, that's about territory claiming, but also what you choose to put on a map. Just the choice, you know, do I put this on that map or that on the map? Makes a statement, change the way you see it. So I'm very interested in the way that local maps are about the way, or not just local maps, personal maps as well, define things. So Esther created me a wonderful map for Christmas. It's a hand-drawn map of Wales, and she drew it from the things that were important for her and she knew about me in Wales. And it's, you know, geographically, it's, you know, it would not, you know, the Ordnance Survey might not go for it, right? But it's not about that. It's about importance. It's about significance. The map on the right here is a mural map of Tyree that's on the side of one of the shops on Tyree. And it's sort of nearly realistic. Well, what am I saying now? Realistic. This is real. This is a map, right? This is somebody's mind. Just like Esther's map was real. It was about instant. It wasn't some set of coordinates. It's about things that are real inside. But it's not an Ordnance Survey map. You know, it's not far off, but things like, it's hard to see because of the colours, but the neck of land at the top, Tyree gets very narrow. It's a bit like a violin or a guitar, a bent violin guitar. It gets very narrow. And that is actually fatter than the standard map at that point. The roads are often slightly further inland, because if you draw a road right at the coast, it gets mixed up with the coast. So there are cartographic reasons, the reasons about comprehension. I think the thickness at the top may be just the way the person drew it, or it might have been because they wanted a bit of space to write some things in. I had a map earlier, actually, which is the Discover Tyree, which is the tourist map. Its boundary is pretty much, you know, you can line it up with the Ordnance Survey. Again, the roads are slightly different positioned, and the choice of which roads go in is not the same as on an Ordnance Survey map. Roads are not drawn in because they don't want people to drive down them. So roads that are there, which aren't, there are lots of roads that aren't drawn in the map, but it's not the smallest roads that aren't drawn, it's the roads you don't want people to drive down. There's a whole set of things that happen in the map. So very interested in the way that, the one I've got on the left here is the Cardigan that I think, is it its 600th or its 400th anniversary as a market town? Anybody know? But it's just had that, and they did a knitted map of Cardigan on a cardigan, which I think is about 4 meters. I've not seen it yet. I'm looking forward to seeing this. I think it's about 4 meters across. What if you could navigate Cardigan on the cardigan rather than on Google Maps? And linear maps as well. This is the first road map, or part of the first road map of the UK in 1673. But you notice this is the map between London and Buckingham, and it's done as a sort of a straight line. Somebody reminded me, I was talking the other day, that, I just said, also, that's a modern Irish map of motorways, but you also get other road maps with motorways like that. So these are common. You used to be able to ask the AA, I think it was, or the RAC, and they would give you a route map just like this. And somebody was telling me about in the Cold War days, and this was definitely top secret at the time, in the bombers, there was a little thing that fitted on the knee of the pilot, and it was a roll-up map of the journey they had to go, and it was a linear map of the journey. Now, it's interesting that there's, I won't go into this in great detail, but those of you who know your physics, right? Newtonian physics is lasagna physics. You have this snapshot of the world, and it's about snapshots of the world, just like your Google map layered on top of each other. There's now, there's tomorrow, there's the next day. And then there's the day before, and the day before, and the day before that. Einsteinian physics, right, special relativity, is not like that. It's spaghetti. Each person carries their time with them. We all live linear lives. We all take a path through. And the journey is, in some sense, a mapping of that into space. But the space is actually probably less significant, and you can argue that, than that line you take through. And actually, in Einsteinian physics, the line is more significant than the space. So there's lots of issues. I won't go into all these. There's some technical issues about how you deal with non-standard maps, how you map coordinates onto each other. There's some really interesting interaction issues, but if you use non-standard maps, how do you deal with the boundaries? But actually, that's true of every map, because the world isn't flat. And so there's always funny issues about boundaries on maps. Some lovely things also about, I'm taking a trail, I'm taking a path, and yet I'm also interested in localities. How does my personal linear route intersect with all those local maps? What does that mean? And all sorts of issues about authoring and who's got control and stuff like that. Okay, and then finally, because I was way ahead of myself at one point. I probably aren't anymore, am I? No. So I've got this. Am I doing okay? You're okay. Okay, that's good. So I've got this, and there will be one more slide. No, there's two more slides. I think that's right. There's two of these, and then two more. Never mind. We're always connected, aren't we? Right? Those of you who work in this building, are you always connected? Phone signal's rubbish, isn't it? Lovely building. Rubbish first phone signal. I'm certainly going to get some major phone signal. You can't. This is the best thing I could find. This is the EE networks. This is the new 4G network. You can vaguely see there's some darker blue areas. Why they've got blue? Why didn't they do them red or orange? You can see them. But they're the bluish areas, probably to hide how bad it is. But the darker blue areas are where there's signal. And if you can see that sort of greenness over here, that's where there's signal along the motorways and around the major towns, and nothing in the mountains. But down the coast, the interesting thing is you'll see little, I said you probably need to see it thing, but there's little arcs pointing out from the coast. This is because mobile masts around the coasts are designed for yachtsmen. The only reason Tyree has any mobile signal is because it's flat, and therefore if you aim out to sea, you also leak to land. Barrow, which is the southernmost of the Outer Hebrides, is like a hill. It's just like one big hill with a road around it. And there is 1 mile of road where nobody lives, where there is good mobile signal, which points out to sea. Why is that? Is it because you're on the physical margins and it's difficult to get the physical margins? No, because there's a mast there. It's because the money is in the yachts, not on the land. Right? So the connectivity around the coasts is targeted. See, I'll probably be in a much better position if I was out in a rowboat than I will be walking. And they said there's, and even on the ground, the broadband isn't going to be great. One of the things I've actually been interested in for many years from a technology point of view, and I believe, and I should double check this sometimes, but I think I wrote the first paper about mobile interfaces there were ones that were written from a technological perspective, but from a sort of human-computer interaction perspective. And that was all about issues of disconnection in the mid-90s, I think. So I've been interested in that as an issue of what happens. How do you design things when you assume there will be disconnection, when there will be intermittent and changing things? The underlying protocols of the internet are designed to cope with different kinds of connection, but are really bad at connections which change over time. Right, so it doesn't matter whether it's a good or a bad connection, but they're really bad when it's a bit intermittent. So I said, lots of issues. There's some issues about data synchronization. Actually, it was more than I said in the slides. Data is synchronization. Just on the right here, this is my address book from my thing. And you might notice the same name appears several times. Now, some of them are different entries, but some of them is because early on, I said I want my iPhone to sync with my Mac, but also it might as well sync through the cloud. And this is all Apple software. There's nothing else, only Apple software. And it started duplicating entries because it didn't recognize the same one. This is actually a solved problem years ago. It's just Apple being lazy. I think they've fixed that now. So yes, you could do it. It's still very poorly, even though some of the problems. But there are actually lots of issues about how you do this well and stuff. And I said it's not just about jerky movies. You know when you get your system updates, and in fact, when I got my Air there, I got when I was about to go away somewhere. And while I was away, and I was in a tourist hotel, not tourist hotel, a business hotel, with the internet in a business hotel. This was not some shaky sort of thing somewhere. I wasn't able to have my iPhone talk to my Mac because it said the iTunes on the Mac wasn't up to date enough. And the internet connection in the business class hotel was not sufficient to be able to do the update because it was a couple of gigabytes. For iTunes, it wasn't even like the whole operating, right? Now, that sounds like a small thing, no, but that means if you don't have good connectivity, your system isn't up to date. If your system isn't up to date, you're likely to be open to viruses and security hacks. And it's also old, and things won't work properly, and it can't connect. And that doesn't just affect the people who are affected directly, it affects everybody, because those machines are then open for attack to then become ones that attack everything else. Right? You know, this is a major security issue for this country, and for all, and any country, in fact, is bandwidth. It doesn't mean we want more bandwidth, it just perhaps means that people shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. And so lots of other issues around that as well. Okay, so those are my concerns, and I will have a slide which I won't talk through. I have also offered myself to people, and so some people here, I think, who have taken me up on this as a living lab. I've said, I'm walking around, wait, this is echoing a bit. Oh, hello, is that better? Yeah. I'm walking around Wales, long time, do stuff with me, you know, do stuff to me. So, amongst other things, I have these two, which somebody in Nottingham has loaned me. This thing is an ECG recorder, which plugs between there and there. And there's a thing that goes on my wrist. I don't wear a wristwatch. It's going to be so difficult having things on me. So I'm going to have a biotrace as well as having GPS. And I am told this is going to be a very rare example of a publicly available long-term biotrace of an individual. So it's something they're getting quite excited about. They don't know what to do with it yet, right? No fixed question thing, but it's data that's not available. So I'm going to be doing some biotracing, but also a whole load of other things. I won't talk through them all. So with Claire, I'll be keeping an eye out for off-road destinations, off-path destinations and issues about those. Various other things, logging toilets on the way. I'm not looking forward to public toilets. A whole range of things. With Olivia and Alan and people from Alan back there and Olivia, who's home team over there, there's going to be, is it all systems ahead for doing a sort of microfab lab thing? So anyway, there's various things happening. How many will work really well? What will, we'll discover, but there's a whole range of stuff going on there. Yes, transport disruption, various things. Okay, and finally, actually I should say though, if anybody here has things that they're interested in, and that doesn't have to be, so if you just look back actually, some of those are technology things. People are giving me bits of kit. Some of them, like the issues of just transport disruption and the off-path destinations, are more about concerns, things to look out for on the way. If anybody's got things that they'd like, like me to have, there might be apps to give me, there might be bits of technology. There's weight limits, and there's other things. But I've got 3.5 months. There's plenty of time. You've not run out of time already. Okay, and now finally, 9:30 a.m. in the base. If anybody wants to come down and see me off tomorrow, I'd be really, really happy to see people. If you want anybody who'd like to walk with me for bits of the way, I'll have my route. And it's approximate for some areas at the moment, but it'll get more detailed as time goes on. So if you want to come and join me for a bit of the way, that'll be absolutely wonderful. If you want to connect me with other people, I mean, that might be media stuff, it might be local communities, particular projects that you know about that aren't your projects, but do that, that'd be wonderful. I said, if you want to use me, that's great, I'm willing to be used. And if you want to watch my progress, I'll have there'll be the blog there, there's the Twitter feed, there's the Facebook feed, all that sort of stuff. And I'll have some more dedicated walking stuff as well, but that'll all link off from the webpage. And I think that really is it. Yay! How have I done, actually? That doesn't feel too bad.
50 minutes.
Oh, wow, that's pretty good for me. If it's an hour, usually it's about an hour and 20, so yeah, doing very well. Yes, I think that is it. I think the next one is, that's right, it's over to you. No, who's doing it? Sorry, it's over to you, that's right, to do the